The intense aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the air at Milano Cafe, a traditional establishment located in the heart of the historic downtown of São Paulo. Amidst antique wooden tables and Venetian mirrors adorning the walls, Marina balanced, a tray laden with empty cups. Her purple hair, tied up in a slightly messy bun, and the various ear piercings she sported contrasted sharply with the classic ambiance of the place. "Marina, table 7, called out Mrs. Luciana Rossi, the Italian owner of the cafe, as she arranged some freshly baked breads in the Art Nouveau display case. The 23-year-old waitress adjusted her black apron and headed toward the indicated table, where a simple-looking gentleman dressed in a modest polo shirt and dress pants waited to be served. He was perusing the menu at such a slow pace that Marina couldn't help but roll her eyes ever so slightly. "Good morning, sir. Have you decided on your order?" she asked, trying to mask her impatience. It was a busy Monday morning, and she still needed to review materials for her advanced culinary techniques exam. The man lifted his eyes from the menu with a calm that bordered on irritation. "Which coffee would you recommend for someone who appreciates a fuller blend?" Marina took a deep breath, restraining her urge to offer any offhand suggestion just to speed things up. Yet something in her passionate nature for gastronomy spoke louder. "We have an exclusive coffee blend, sir, developed especially for Milano Cafe. It's a combination of beans from the southern Minas region with a touch of coffee from the Bahian Cerrado. The result is a beverage with notes of dark chocolate and a slightly fruity finish." The man observed her with renewed interest. "Interesting. And how do you suggest it be served?" "Personally, I recommend using a French press. It better preserves the essential oils and accentuates the more complex notes of the blend," she replied, momentarily forgetting her rush. "I see you know quite a bit about coffee," he commented, still without placing his order. Marina let out an impatient sigh. "I'm studying gastronomy, sir, and honestly, we have several tables waiting to be served. Could you please place your order?" The man raised his eyebrows, visibly surprised by her barely concealed brusqueness. "So, of course, my apologies. I'll have the blend you recommended, served in a French press." Quickly jotting down his order, Marina spun on her heel and headed toward the counter. As she prepared the coffee, her hands moved with an automatic precision, born of years of practice. She weighed the beans, adjusted the grind, and heated the water to the ideal temperature. Unbeknownst to her, across the room, the customer observed her with meticulous attention. Alberto Conti, owner of one of the largest restaurant chains in Brazil, had found exactly what he was looking for, even if he didn't yet know it. When Marina returned with the coffee, served in an elegant French press, accompanied by a small, handcrafted biscotti, her expression still bore traces of impatience. The man sipped the drink slowly, closing his eyes for a moment. "Exceptional," he murmured, more to himself than to Marina. "Anything else, sir?" she asked, already preparing to attend to other tables. "No, thank you. That will be all for now." Marina quickly moved away, plunging back into the morning rush. In the following hours, amid orders and deliveries, she occasionally noticed the man still at his table, sipping his coffee deliberately while making notes in a small notebook. The day dragged on amidst coffee cups, slices of pie, and constant worries about the exam she had later that evening. Marina barely noticed when the gentleman finally got up to pay at the register, leaving the establishment as discreetly as he had entered. At the end of her shift, Marina was preparing to leave when Mrs. Luciana Rossi called her into the office. The small back room of the cafe was like a living museum of the establishment's history, with old photographs adorning the walls and an impressive collection of vintage coffee machines. "Marina, we need to talk about your service today," began the Italian lady, her brown eyes conveying a mixture of sternness and maternal affection. "It was because of that slow customer, wasn't it? Mrs. Lu, I had other tables to attend to and—" "Exactly why we need to talk," interrupted Luciana, picking up an envelope from the table. "Do you know how much he left in tips?" Marina shrugged, already imagining a few coins. It was common for tardy customers to leave meager tips. 500 Rs, Mrs. Luciana revealed, extending the envelope to an astonished Marina. and he left it for you." Inside the envelope, along with the banknotes, was a handwritten card with a message. True talent is not measured solely by technical skill, but also by the capacity to treat each person with the dignity they deserve. Your coffee was exceptional, your service not so much. Think on that. Marina felt her face burn with shame. "Mrs. Liu, You know, Marina, when I arrived in Brazil 30 years ago, I was once an impatient young woman like you. I thought I knew everything about coffee, because I had grown up in a family of baristas in Trieste. But it was here, serving people, that I learned the most valuable lessons." Marina sank into a chair, still holding the card. The message, though kind, had struck a sensitive chord. "The gentleman spent hours observing the coffee," Mrs. Luciana continued. "He noted everything, the flow of customers, how the waiters interacted, the preparation of the drinks. Do you know why I know this? Because I used to do the same when I was learning about the Brazilian market." Frowning, the young waitress began to realize there was more to this story. "Mrs. Liu, who was that man?" The Italian smiled mysteriously. "Ah, my dear, you'll have to find out for yourself. But I suggest that next time he appears, and believe me, he will, you show the same care in your service as you do with your coffee." That night on her way to college, Marina couldn't stop thinking about the incident. The generous tip and the enigmatic note occupied her thoughts, even during her advanced culinary techniques exam. As she answered questions about cooking, points and cutting techniques, her mind wandered back to the stranger's words. The following days passed normally at Milano Cafe, yet Marina sensed a subtle change in her own demeanor. She began observing the customers more attentively, trying to understand their stories through small details, the way they held their cups, their menu choices, the pace at which they savored their beverages. A week later, on an unusually quiet morning, she saw him again. The same gentleman in his unassuming clothes and contemplative air sat at the same table. Marina took a deep breath, adjusted her apron, and approached with a genuine smile. "Good morning, sir. Welcome back to Milano Cafe. Would you like to try something different today? We just received a special lot of coffee from the Mantiqueira region." The man lifted his eyes from the menu and studied her for a moment, a small smile forming on his lips. "I see you still remember me." "Of course," Marina replied, her cheeks tinting with a slight blush. "And I'd like to thank you for the tip and the advice from last week. You were right." In the following weeks, the mysterious gentleman's visits to Milano Cafe became more frequent. Marina noticed a pattern. He always arrived at different times, sometimes in the morning, other times in the afternoon, always choosing tables that offered a good view of the main hall. One particularly hectic afternoon, while serving a table of executives, Marina overheard a conversation that caught her attention. "Did you see?" "It's him," whispered one customer to her companion. "The owner of the Conti Group, right here in our cafe." Marina nearly dropped the tray. Discreetly, she looked around the room but saw no one who fit the description of a major entrepreneur. Only the regulars, including the mysterious gentleman in his usual corner, savoring yet another cup of coffee. During her break, Marina quickly searched on her phone for information about the Conti Group. Her hands trembled slightly as images appeared. One of the largest restaurant chains in the country, with award-winning establishments and internationally recognized social projects. Yet she couldn't find any recent photograph of the owner. "Looking for something interesting?" Mrs. Luciana Rossi's voice surprised her. The Italian smiled enigmatically, as if knowing something Marina had not yet realized. "Mrs. Liu, do you know the Conti Group?" Marina asked, hastily tucking her phone away. "Oh, who doesn't? An inspiring story indeed. They say the owner started as a waiter, just like you. Today, besides the restaurants, he runs one of the largest social gastronomy schools in the country." Something stirred within Marina. A social gastronomy school. That struck a chord. Her own struggles with ever-rising college fees were becoming increasingly burdensome. That very afternoon, Marina noticed something different. The mysterious gentleman was not alone. He was quietly conversing with a younger, elegantly dressed man. She moved closer to take the orders, careful not to reveal her curiosity. "The usual for me, Marina," said the regular customer, surprising her by using her name for the first time. "And for my companion, I suggest that special mantiqueira coffee you introduced to me last week." "Excellent choice," she replied, noting how intently the younger man watched her. While preparing the coffees, Marina began to notice other details that had previously gone unnoticed. The mysterious gentleman always carried a small notebook in which he made observations. He would frequently exchange discreet messages on his cell phone after observing something in the cafe. And most intriguingly, other staff members seemed to treat him with a special deference she hadn't noticed before. Taking a chance to do something different, Marina decided to offer a little extra. Along with the beverages, she brought a small plate containing 2 gourmet brigadeiros she had prepared in her pastry class. "A little house treat," she explained as she placed the plate on the table. "It's a recipe I developed for my college. Project: coffee brigadeiros with a hint of fleur de sel." The mysterious gentleman raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. He tasted the sweet treat with the same meticulous attention he dedicated to his coffee. "Impressive," he commented, turning to his companion. "Notice the balance between the bitterness of the coffee and the sweetness of the chocolate, and that touch of salt at the end. Very well thought out." Marina's cheeks flushed with the compliment, but before she could thank him, she was called to attend another table. When she returned a few minutes later, the 2 men had already left. In place of the usual tip card, she found a neatly folded brochure tucked under the cup. The brochure was an elegant announcement printed on textured paper: "Conti Scholarships for Young Gastronomy Talents." The words leapt out at her like a beacon in the dark. The program offered complete training in gastronomy, including specialized courses abroad. "It's no coincidence," she murmured, rereading the brochure for the 10th time during her break. The applications were open, and the requirements included proven experience in the food sector and a practical culinary skills test. That night at home, Marina could barely sleep. Her small shared apartment in the Bra neighborhood, decorated with posters of famous dishes and photographs of renowned chefs, seemed to vibrate with the promise of change. Seated at her improvised study desk amid gastronomy books and bills, to pay, she began filling out the online application form. "Marina, you won't believe this," exclaimed Pedro, her best friend and college mate, as he burst into the cafe the next morning. An aspiring chef specializing in street food, he also worked in the sector, running a successful food truck. "What's up?" she asked while wiping. "Down the counter. That gentleman who always comes here? I saw him at the municipal market yesterday talking with several vendors. Some people mentioned he's a major investor looking for new gastronomic talents." A shiver ran down Marina's spine. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. "Pedro, I need to show you something," she said, pulling the brochure from the pocket of her apron. As they discussed the possibilities, Mrs. Luciana Rossi observed the scene with a discreet smile. She approached carrying an old wooden box. "Marina, my dear, I think it's time I told you a story," she began, opening the box to reveal a yellowed photograph. 25 years ago, a very dedicated young waiter worked here at Milano Cafe. He had a special talent for understanding people and a genuine passion for gastronomy. In the photograph, a smiling young man in the Milano Cafe uniform posed alongside a younger Mrs. Luciana. Marina's heart raced as she recognized, even if decades younger, the face of her mysterious customer. "Alberto Conti," she whispered, finally understanding the magnitude of the situation. "Yes," confirmed Mrs. Luciana, "he never forgot his roots. Every year he discreetly visits various establishments, searching for young talents for his scholarship program. People who, like him in the past, have potential but need an opportunity." Marina sat down, feeling the weight of the revelation. For weeks, she had served coffee to one of Brazil's biggest names in gastronomy without any idea of who he was. Worse yet, she had been impatient and rude during their first encounter. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice a mix of emotions. "Because Alberto wanted to see you be yourself, without the pressure of knowing who he was. And do you know what makes me most proud? Seeing how you naturally changed your way of serving, Not because you knew who he was, but because you came to understand the value of every customer. At that moment, the bell on the cafe door rang, announcing the arrival of another customer. Marina quickly rose, straightened her uniform, and turned to find Alberto Conti. This time he wasn't dressed in his usual simple clothes, but in an elegant Italian suit. "Good morning, Marina," he greeted warmly. "I see you've discovered who I am. May we talk?" The Conti Group's headquarters was an impressive building in the heart of the Jardins district, with a modern facade that contrasted with an inviting interior decorated with elements harking back to the history of Brazilian gastronomy. Marina crossed the lobby with her heart pounding, carrying her case of personal knives and utensils. "Candidate number 247, Marina Santos," announced the receptionist, handing her a badge. "Please follow the corridor on the right to the main auditorium." The auditorium was filled with other candidates, all sporting expressions of determination and nervousness. Marina recognized a few faces from the city's gastronomic circuit. A sous chef from a famous Japanese restaurant, an award-winning pastry chef, and several gastronomy students like herself. "Attention, candidates," an elegant woman stepped onto the stage. "I'm Carolina Mendez, director of the Conti Scholarships program. Today you will participate in the first phase of the selection process. We will divide you into groups for a practical test of basic skills." Marina was assigned to kitchen, 3 along with 9 other candidates. The environment was impressive: state-of-the-art equipment, spotless stainless steel counters, and a panoramic view of the city from the 20th floor windows. "Good morning, everyone," a familiar voice made Marina freeze. Alberto Conti had entered the kitchen, accompanied by 2 other evaluators. "Today we'll test your fundamental skills, nothing elaborate or overly technical. We want to see how well you master the basics." For a brief moment, Alberto's eyes met Marina's, though his expression remained professional and neutral. She felt her cheeks heat up as memories of that first encounter in the cafe resurfaced. The test consisted of 3 parts: preparing basic sauces from classical cuisine, executing precise vegetable cuts, and a sensory palate challenge. Marina took a deep breath, concentrating on every movement. Her hands worked with precision as she prepared a perfect bechamel sauce, a result of countless hours of practice at college. During the cutting test, Marina noticed her hands trembling slightly. Alberto's attentive gaze made her nervous, but she forced herself to remember Mrs. Luciana's words: "True skill shows under pressure." In the sensory challenge, candidates had to identify different types of coffee and their origins solely by aroma and taste. A discreet smile spread across Marina's lips. This was her specialty. "Coffee from the Minas Cerrado, with notes of chocolate and caramel," she stated confidently. "A medium roast, probably from the Patrocinio region." Alberto scribbled notes on his clipboard, his face betraying no emotion. Yet Marina caught a glimmer of approval in his eyes. At the end of the test, while cleaning her workstation, Marina overheard a conversation between 2 other candidates. "Did you see? They say he personally selects each scholarship recipient," one young chef commented, "and that the program isn't just about cooking, but about transforming lives." Carefully putting away her utensils, Marina reflected on how her own life had already begun to change since that first poorly served cup of coffee. Milano Cafe had become more than just a job. It was a school of life. Hours later, as she exited the building, Marina received a message on her phone from Mrs. Luciana asking how the test had gone. As she typed a response, she noticed someone watching her. On the opposite sidewalk, Alberto Conti was getting into a modest car, a well-maintained blue Beetle, a surprising choice for someone of his stature. A week after the practical test, Marina continued her routine at Milano Cafe, but something had shifted. Every coffee she prepared and every customer she served now felt like an opportunity to learn. She began creating little cards for regulars, noting their preferences, favorite times, and the stories they shared. "You're different," Pedro observed during a visit to the cafe. He had parked his food truck on the corner and was taking a break for a coffee. "More centered." "The selection process made me realize something," Marina replied as she prepared a special cappuccino for her friend. It's not just about cooking well, it's about connecting with people through food. At that moment, Carolina Mendez, the director of the scholarship program, entered the cafe. Marina's heart raced. Could it be a coincidence? Miss Santos, Carolina called, approaching the counter. Could you come with me for a moment? In a more private area, Carolina opened an elegant folder. Your results on the practical test were exceptional, especially on the sensory part. However, that isn't all we're looking for. Marina nodded, trying to keep her composure. I understand. Mr. Conti mentioned something about fundamental skills. Exactly, Carolina smiled. And one of those skills is the ability to recognize and correct our own mistakes. Tell me about your first interaction with Mr. Conti. Marina felt her face burn. It was terrible. I judged him by his appearance. I was impatient and rude, but I learned a lot from that mistake. And how did you change? After that, I started paying more attention, understanding that every customer has a story. I began keeping a notebook on the regulars' preferences, even developing personalized blends. Marina paused, realization dawning. Just like Mr. Conti did during his visits. Carolina's smile widened. Congratulations, Marina. You are among the finalists for the program. The news hit Marina like a shock of cold water. But I thought there would be more stages, more tests. Oh, but there were, Carolina replied. Every visit Mr. Conti made to the cafe, every interaction you had with customers after that first encounter, every initiative you took to improve the service, everything was part of the evaluation. At that moment, as if on cue, Alberto Conti entered the cafe, accompanied by Mrs. Luciana. The two chatted animatedly in Italian. Marina, called Mrs. Luciana, please come here. Alberto was telling me about his plans for a new project. Approaching the table, Marina noticed various documents spread out, architectural blueprints, menu proposals, cost spreadsheets. Please have a seat, Alberto said, addressing Marina and Carolina. I have a proposal to make. The scholarship program is just the beginning. We're planning something bigger, a social gastronomy school to be built right here in the center of São Paulo. And we want our students to learn not only culinary techniques, but also fundamental values. Marina, your journey of personal transformation is exactly the kind of story we want to share. Marina looked around at Milano Cafe, the walls that held so many stories, the customers she had come to know and respect, and Mrs. Luciana beaming with pride. Suddenly everything made sense. Every difficult moment, every lesson learned, every cup of coffee served with growing dedication. The former textile factory in Brás was about to be given a new life. Marina followed Alberto Conti down the corridors of the historic building, imagining how the space would transform into the future social gastronomy school. You know, Marina, began Alberto, as they watched workers start renovations, when I was your age, I also worked as a waiter to pay for my studies, not at Milano but in a small cafe in the Mucca neighborhood. Marina looked at her mentor in surprise. It was the first time he spoke of his past. The cafe owner was a strict man, one of those who tested the coffee several times a day to maintain the standard, he continued, a nostalgic smile playing on his lips. One day, an important client showed up, a Japanese businessman in the food industry. I treated him with the same impatience you showed me during our first encounter. And what happened? Asked Marina, already imagining the outcome. He became my first investor, Alberto replied with a soft laugh. But before that, he taught me a valuable lesson about humility and perseverance. That's why I keep up the habit of visiting establishments discreetly. Sometimes, the greatest talents are hidden in the most unlikely places. As they walked through the future space of the experimental kitchen, Marina noticed the similarities between her own story and Alberto's. Both had started as waiters. Both had learned valuable lessons through unexpected encounters. Did you keep in touch with your first boss? She asked curiously. Actually, I did something even better, Alberto answered, stopping before a wall where the future workstations would be installed. I bought his cafe when he decided to retire. It was my first business venture. Today it's one of the most traditional restaurants in the Conti Group. A shiver ran down Marina's spine as she realized the magnitude of the cycle coming full circle. And now you're giving the same opportunity to others. Not just the same opportunity, Alberto corrected. I'm trying to create something bigger. This school will not be merely a technical training center. It will be a place where stories like mine and yours can multiply. At that moment, Carolina Mendez joined them, carrying several folders. The first resumes have already started arriving, she announced. Young people from all over the country are interested in the program. Marina flipped through some of the documents, recognizing in each story a bit of her own journey. Students working in snack bars, kitchen aides dreaming of an opportunity, waiters passionate about gastronomy. Marina, Alberto said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, there's something I need to ask of you. In addition to your participation as a scholarship student, I would like you to take on a special role in the project. She looked at him, intrigued. I want you to be our ambassador, he continued. Your story, from that first encounter at Milano Cafe to your transformation, is exactly the kind of example we want to share. But for that you must be willing to expose your journey, including your mistakes and learnings. Marina felt the weight of responsibility in his words. Exposing her errors publicly wouldn't be easy, but perhaps it was exactly what other young people needed to hear. There's one more thing, added Carolina, exchanging a meaningful look with Alberto. We'd like you to continue working at Milano Cafe even after classes begin. But why? Asked Marina, confused. Because Milano will be our first cafe school, Alberto revealed, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. Mrs. Luciana agreed to transform part of the space into a training center. And you, Marina, will be the link between the past and the future of this project. That Sunday morning, Milano Cafe was closed, yet the aroma of fresh coffee still lingered in the air. Marina, Alberto, and Mrs. Luciana gathered at one of the tables, surrounded by coffee cups and plans for renovating the space. Look, explained Mrs. Luciana, pointing to an architectural blueprint. We can transform the mezzanine into a practical classroom while keeping the main cafe area operational. And here, added Alberto, indicating another section of the project, we will create a roasting laboratory and sensory analysis area. The students will learn about coffee from bean to cup. Marina observed everything with a mix of excitement and nostalgia. Milano Cafe, which had been her refuge and school over the years, was about to be literally transformed into a learning center. But there's one condition, Mrs. Luciana interrupted, her Italian accent more pronounced than usual, a common occurrence when she got emotional. I want you to preserve the essence of this place. Every scratch on these furnishings, every mark on these walls tells a story. Actually, said Alberto as he retrieved something from his folder, that's why I brought this. He produced an album of old photographs, some yellowed with time. I found it while organizing documents from the early days of my career. The photos narrated not only the story of Milano Cafe, but also that of an entire generation of gastronomy professionals who had passed through its doors, waiters who were now renowned chefs, students who became entrepreneurs in the industry, success, stories that had all started with a simple cup of coffee. Look at this one, Alberto said, pointing to a particular photograph. In it, a young waiter smiled next to a stern-looking gentleman in front of a cafe in Muka. That was me, and this was Mr. Tanaka, the Japanese businessman who changed my life. Marina carefully picked up the photo, noticing every detail. Young Alberto's immaculate uniform, Mr. Tanaka's appraising gaze, and the modest facade of the cafe in the background. He taught me that true gastronomy isn't just about the taste of food, but about the complete experience, Alberto continued. About respecting the ingredient, the customer, the tradition. That's when I realized I wanted to do something bigger than just serve coffee. Mrs. Luciana discreetly wiped away a tear. And now the circle is complete. Milano will continue, transforming lives as it always has, but in an even more special way. Marina felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. As the project's ambassador, she would be the bridge between those past stories and the dreams of future students. There's one more thing, said Alberto, pulling a final document from his folder. This is the project for a special coffee blend, that will be served exclusively here at Milano. I want you to develop it, Marina. It will be your first official mission as our ambassador." "But me? Develop a blend?" Marina hesitated. "Yes," he confirmed. "A coffee that tells our story, one that carries the Italian tradition of Milano, the innovation of our social project, and that special touch that only someone who has lived through transformation can give." At that moment, the cafe doors bell rang softly. It was Pedro carrying a box of sweets from his food truck. "Sorry for the interruption," he said, placing the box on the table, "but I couldn't resist contributing to this historic meeting." Inside the box were gourmet brigadeiros, the same recipe Marina had once served to Alberto on that crucial day, now perfected by Pedro at his food truck. Later, in the Conti Group's state-of-the-art sensory analysis laboratory, a space boasting the latest equipment and a privileged view of the city, Marina spent hours experimenting with different bean combinations, adjusting roasts and searching for the perfect balance for the blend that would narrate the project's story. "How's it going?" Carolina asked as she entered the lab on a particularly intense afternoon of tests. Marina gestured to the dozens of samples laid out on the counter. "It's more challenging than I imagined. Each bean has its own story, its own character. Combining them into something harmonious that represents both the past and the future of Milano. Tell me about your choices," Carolina encouraged, sitting on one of the high stools. "Well," Marina began, picking up a few beans, "I started with a coffee from southern Minas, from the Carmo de Minas region. It's the base of Milano's current blend. It represents tradition." Moving to another container, she continued, "Then I added beans from the Minas Tirado, which give that body and sweetness that Mr. Conti so appreciates." Carolina watched intently as Marina navigated among the samples with growing confidence. "But something was missing," she continued. "Then I recalled a conversation with Mrs. Luciana about how traditional Italian coffee always has a touch of Robusta in the mix. That's when I got an idea. I included a special Robusta from Espirito Santo, grown by a family agriculture cooperative." "An interesting choice," Carolina remarked. "And why?" "Because that coffee perfectly represents what we want for the social project. It's a bean many considered inferior, but with proper cultivation and processing, it reveals extraordinary potential. Besides, the cooperative producing it already has a training program for young farmers." At that moment, Alberto entered the laboratory, accompanied by a gentleman of East Asian features, Mr. Tanaka. "Mr. Tanaka decided to come all the way from Japan to see our project," explained Alberto. "And he's interested in tasting the new blend you're developing, Marina." Marina's heart raced. She carefully prepared 3 different extraction methods for her blend: espresso, drip, and French press. Each method would reveal different aspects of the beverage. Mr. Tanaka sampled each cup with absolute concentration, making notes in Japanese in a small notebook. The silence in the lab was almost palpable. Finally, he turned to Alberto and said something in Japanese, a slight smile on his lips. "He says the coffee tells a story," translated Alberto, "that he can feel the Italian tradition in the notes of dark chocolate, the Brazilian innovation in its velvety body, and something special. A story of transformation at the end." Marina felt her eyes well up. It was exactly what she had tried to express through that careful combination of beans. "One more thing," Alberto continued. "Mr. Tanaka wants to know if you would accept spending a month in Japan studying the local coffee culture. He was impressed by your ability to translate stories into flavors." Then Mr. Tanaka addressed Marina directly, speaking in carefully articulated Portuguese. "Sometimes we need to look back at our roots to build the future. Your coffee does exactly that." Carolina smiled as she checked her agenda. "Actually, that fits perfectly with our plans. The trip could take place after the school's inauguration. You'd be back in time to welcome the first batch of students." Marina looked at the cups on the counter, at the carefully selected beans, at her notebooks filled with observations and discoveries. Somehow that blend had become more than just a drink. It was a symbol of her own journey of transformation, After weeks of careful renovations that preserved its historical essence while incorporating modern elements, Milano Café was unrecognizable. The mezzanine had been transformed into an elegant classroom with professional workstations and a projection system for theoretical classes. On the eve of the official inauguration, Marina walked through the empty space, absorbing every detail. The old photographs of the cafe now shared the walls with a timeline telling the establishment's history, culminating in the social school project. "It's strange to see Milano so quiet," commented Pedro, who had arrived early to help with final preparations. His food truck, now an official part of the project, was parked in a specially designated area in the outdoor courtyard. "Tomorrow this place will be full of life," Marina replied as she adjusted a few details on the coffee display. The new blend, christened Trasformazione, was showcased prominently, its elegant packaging narrating the project's story through delicate illustrations. Mrs. Luciana emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of fresh cannoli. "My grandma's recipe," she explained as she placed the tray on the counter. "Tomorrow we'll make sure to serve not just coffee, but a little piece of each of our histories." Marina's phone buzzed. It was a message from Carolina with the final guest list for the inauguration. There would be dignitaries, renowned chefs, specialized journalists, and most importantly, the 50 young individuals selected for the school's inaugural class. "Look at this," Pedro exclaimed, flipping through one of the new menus. In addition to the traditional beverages, there was a special section detailing the story behind Trasformazione and its connection to the social project. Who would have thought that the day you were rude to Mr. Conti would end up becoming an official part of the cafe's history? Marina smiled, recalling that first encounter. "You know what's even more amazing? Every cup of this blend will help finance new scholarships. Mr. Conti insisted that a portion of the profits be allocated to the social program." At that moment, Alberto entered the cafe accompanied by a team of photographers. It was time for the photo shoot for the school's institutional materials. "Marina," he called, "I want you and Mrs. Luciana to appear in some special photos. We're going to recreate that very first scene, when I served you that coffee that changed our lives." As they positioned themselves for the pictures, Marina noticed something different about Alberto's uniform. He wore the same waiter's apron featured in the old photographs with Mr. Tanaka. "To never forget where we came from," he explained, catching Marina's glance. The photos captured significant moments. Marina and Mrs. Luciana preparing coffee together, Pedro presenting his gastronomic creations, Alberto sharing his knowledge with some of the future students invited to the shoot. At the end of the session, everyone gathered for one last group photo. That was when Marina noticed something special. On the cafe's walls, among the old and new photographs, there were empty spaces. "They're for the stories that are yet to be told here," Mrs. Luciana explained, following Marina's gaze. "For the future talents who will transform their lives, just as you have." Night fell over São Paulo, and the cafe's lights were turned on one by one. Marina prepared one last round of coffee for the team, using Trasformazione. The familiar aroma, now enriched with new notes and meanings, filled the renovated space. "Cheers," proposed Alberto, raising his cup, "to the past that taught us, the present that transformed us, and the future we will build together." The inauguration day dawned with a typical São Paulo drizzle, yet not even the cloudy sky diminished the brilliance of the moment. Milano Café looked impeccable. The antique tables gleamed under vintage lights, and the aroma of Trasformazione permeated every corner of the renewed space. Marina arrived before sunrise, dressed in her new uniform, a personalized apron that blended Milano's classic design with modern elements from the social project. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the first batch of coffee for the day. "Are you nervous?" asked Mrs. Luciana, emerging from the kitchen with a tray of freshly baked brioches. "A little," admitted Marina. "It's strange to think that in a few hours I'll be sharing my story with all these people." "Remember," said the Italian kindly, adjusting Marina's apron, "you're not just telling a story, you're inspiring future dreamers." The first to arrive were the 50 young individuals selected for the inaugural class. Marina watched as they timidly entered, eyes wide at the space, the same look she had when she first started working here. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted, her voice firmer than she had expected. "Before we begin, how about we start with some coffee?" As she served trasformazione to the future students, Marina shared little details about each stage of the preparation and the history behind the blend. The young ones listened intently, some taking notes, others discreetly snapping photos. "This counter," she explained, trailing her hand over the polished wood, "has over 50 years of stories. How many dreams were planned here? How many ideas were born over a cup of coffee? And now it will witness your dreams as well." Pedro arrived with his food truck, now officially decorated with the school's logo. Aromas wafted from the vehicle. He had created a special menu for the event, blending street food flavors with refined techniques. "The true flavors of São Paulo," he explained to the curious students, because gastronomy isn't just about sophisticated dishes, it's about telling stories through food. Meanwhile, Carolina coordinated the arrival of VIP guests, renowned chefs, gastronomic critics, and representatives of important culinary institutions. Mr. Tanaka, who had extended his stay in Brazil specifically for the event, was animatedly conversing in Japanese with a group of journalists. Alberto Conti remained discreetly in the background, watching everything with the same keen look Marina had known for months. But now she understood. He was witnessing his dreams materialize just as she was. The most moving moment of the morning came when a group of former Milano Cafe employees, some already retired, arrived for the ceremony. Among them were waiters, who had once worked with a young Alberto, cooks who had passed down culinary secrets to Mrs. Luciana, and baristas who had helped create the original blend. "Look," Marina told her future students, pointing to the photographs on the walls. "Each of these images tells a story of transformation, and the most amazing part is that now you will be part of that story." When it came time for her official speech, Marina surprised everyone by not stepping onto the small stage set up for the occasion. Instead, she remained behind, the counter preparing coffee. "The best way to tell my story," she began, her hands executing the precise motions of coffee preparation, "is through what I've come to love, the coffee ritual." The aroma of the coffee Marina prepared filled the room as she continued her narrative, her hands moving with the precision of someone who truly understood her craft. "Every cup of coffee we serve here carries a story," she explained, watching the hot water slowly seep into the freshly ground beans. The story of the farmer who grew the beans, of the roasting master who developed the blend, of the barista who prepared the drink, and of the one who savors it. The guests listened in respectful silence, many recognizing in her story their own humble beginnings and journeys of transformation. "When I first stepped into this cafe," she continued as she began serving trasformazione in specially designed cups for the occasion, "I was just an impatient waitress, too caught up in my own world to see the magic happening all around me." The cups were distributed first to the new students, then to the special guests. But Milano Cafe taught me more than just coffee-making techniques. It taught me about respect, humility, and the importance of being truly present in every moment. She paused, exchanging a meaningful glance with Alberto. "Sometimes we need someone to see our potential, even when we ourselves can't." Alberto stepped up to the counter carrying one last cup, the very same one Marina had used to serve him on that first fateful day. "And sometimes," he added, "we need someone who challenges our own assumptions." Marina reminded me why I started this project, because I believe gastronomy has the power to transform lives. Mrs. Luciana, who had been quietly observing, joined them. "Milano Cafe has always been more than just a coffee shop," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's been a place of encounters, of stories, of transformations. And now, thanks to all of you, it will continue to be so for many generations." Marina turned to the 50 young individuals who would soon be her students. "Each of you has a unique story, a special dream. In the coming months, we will share not only techniques and knowledge, but our stories, our experiences, our transformations. Mr. Tanaka, who had remained silent until now, raised his cup in a traditional Japanese gesture of appreciation. "Coffee," he said in his carefully articulated Portuguese, "is a bridge between people, between cultures, between dreams." Pedro, watching from his food truck, added, "And sometimes all it takes is one well-served cup of coffee to change the course of a story." At that moment, as if the sky itself wished to join the celebration, the typical São Paulo drizzle gave way to a timid sun whose rays streamed through the century-old windows of Milano, creating a play of light over the coffee cups. Marina looked around at the newly renovated cafe, now filled with smiling faces and hopeful eyes. On the walls, old and new photographs together narrated the story of a place that never stopped, reinventing itself. The aroma of trasformazione hovered in the air like a promise of new beginnings. "Then," she concluded, raising her own cup, "shall we write the next chapter of this story together?" 50 cups were raised in response, and in that moment Marina knew that her journey of transformation was just beginning. Milano Cafe, which had been her starting point, would now serve as the launching pad for many other dreamers. And so, amid the aromas of coffee and renewed dreams, a new era began in the heart of São Paulo, proving that sometimes the greatest transformations start with a simple cup of coffee and a heart open to learning.